What is going on, everybody? Today we're going to start our custom carbon fiber flares. Alright, so doing the S550 rear end swap, we knew we were going to be wider no matter what. We just got a set of 10.5 inch wide rims, so that kind of pushes them out even a little bit more. So to be legal with the rules with the rear end swap and everything, we ended up about 1.5 inches rearward of where the solid axle center line used to be. But not only that, the way that the pivots are on this S550 subframe, you can't see them right now. I'll put a picture up on the screen. The angle of the inner mounting points give the control arm a recession, which means as it actually bumps up like backwards a little bit. So that's pretty good for anti-squat. It's pretty good for hitting bumps. The wheel kind of like gives a little bit more, but it's not very good for tire clearance. So we're going to have to get pretty deep into flaring this, but we're going to flare it with a handful of just kind of, you know, common tools and materials, and just kind of do a set of one-off flares for this thing. We are going to take some measurements of this wheel. I don't have tires for it yet, so we're going to take our old ones, space them out to where, you know, these ones are, and kind of use our old tires to make sure we get our clearances and everything right, and then we can kind of start cutting everything. Alright guys, so with a little bit of measuring of the back spacing of the new rims and the old rims, you can see with a 1-inch spacer in there, the back spacing with this and one of those little knockoff quarter inch thick spacers gives me, you know, almost the exact same width of everything. So now I can use this wheel with this tire to know how much metal I need to cut out and everything. We're gonna pull the bumper off because honestly I have no idea what I'm doing in this area of the car, like behind the tire. Something maybe a little like DTM-ish, I think is my current DTM, where it's a little more just like smooth, streamlined. I don't think I'm gonna do like an old school with any canards. I'm just gonna pull the pull the bumper off of it, figure out how much bump travel I need, kind of just cut everything out. Once I cut everything out, then I can kind of start shaping some foam into my plug, and then kind of keep moving on from there. Alright guys, so I think we're about set up to start cutting. What we're going to do, if you remember, like the wheel being set back, we don't need to cut way up front. I'm going to put the tire on, but we're going to start our cut almost back a little bit. The outer quarter panel, we're going to cut up kind of around about where we need to go. But I don't want to go all the way through, because if you look on the inside, this inner wheel well being metal, if I just cut the outer off of it, we can use this inner sheet metal and kind of just fold it out like a flap. So that way when we end up putting the new flare on, we don't really need to like cut and weld a bunch of extra metal in there. That inner wheel well hopefully can just kind of like flap out to where we need to meet up with the new flare we're going to build. That's my initial idea. We're going to get back into here, cut off a bunch of this, just whatever, extra metal. This is all bent up from when my tire exploded, so yeah, I think that's kind of our, you know, our game plan right at the moment. Alright, so you can see we're starting to tape out our line. You can see I got some silver Sharpie marks, and I'm getting ready to tape it. But before I lose these measurements, if you watch old videos, that 15 3/4 is from that line right there to the center of the wheel. So that way I can kind of, without having to put this thing down, you know, I know where the wheel is in relation to, you know, when everything's loaded. I'm going to give myself about 3 inches of clearance because my diffuser and flat floor and everything is only going to be about 3.5 inches of ground clearance. So like, what's the point of allowing the wheel to go up more? I'm going to bump stop the shock to prevent the diffuser and flat floor from bottoming out before I allow the tire to just smash into the body of the car or the, you know, the flat floor to smash into the ground. I hope that all makes sense. So I honestly don't need too much of a cut. Despite, you know, how much more rearward this wheel moves through its travel. Alright guys, so we're pretty much cut out with the clearance we need. You can see we got a little bit of movement. The jack is actually maxed out, but we're already at about 3.5 inches of wheel travel. And then this metal, you can see I can move it with my thumb. So what I'm going to do is like push this metal up to the edge of the quarter, tack weld it all together. And like I mentioned earlier, let's get this out of the way, you know, the inside will be, aside from like the slits I needed to make, pretty much sealed up. So that way, you know, even though we race in the rain, you gotta have windows open and stuff, all the spray coming off the tire at least won't kind of like go and like pull up in like the quarter panel of the car. So, you know, once I get these tacked into place, kind of trim off the excess, and at that point I can kind of start foaming out my, you know, flare. Alright, so here we have the metalwork roughed out. You can see we just cut off the extra lip. So on the inside, all we really have to fill up is the few little slots that I had to cut. So not bad at all. You know, not winning any car shows with this, but that's obviously not what we're going for. Also, there's no tack welds or anything sharp kind of facing down. They're all kind of out this side. So I can pretty much like rub my hand on this underside and it doesn't really get snagged on anything. So if a tire comes up and it does make it that far up, it has a less chance of really slicing into the tire as well. So we're at a good enough point where we're gonna throw the tire on, put it at its ride height, and kind of start building our, you know, the plug for our flare. All right, so we have a stand underneath of the tire. This tire is almost exactly where it's gonna go when the car is just, you know, on the ground normal. We pre-cut a few foam spacers that we're going to put around the wheel and kind of, you know, we're just going to hot glue them on and kind of just keep adding foam as we need to make the shape we're going for. So I don't even think time-lapse would be worth it on this. This is kind of a time-consuming bit. So what I'm just going to do is kind of, you know, check in a couple of times, you know, just so you can kind of see what I'm doing, how to shape it and mold it. Not really mold it, but you know, form it, if you will. So yeah, I'm just gonna kind of knock some of this out and catch you guys up in a little bit. All right, so first update, you can see we have our little spacers in there. Those are 1-inch blocks, and then we have our first wheel arch. So this is pretty much defining what's going to be the outer edge of the flare. As you can tell from the side, you know, you can see how it lines up perfectly with the tire. I guess if I wanted to be like super ultra critical, I probably should have, like, I don't have the springs and I can't really get this thing on the ground, but do an alignment first, because the camber and toe will change the tire a little bit, but I don't think it's that critical. We're talking maybe, you know, 1/16 of an inch toe, 1/8 inch or so of camber. It's, you know, it's not really worth fighting over. So yeah, so I got up to this point. I'm just gonna keep moving ahead. Alright guys, so update time. We have the full width of the, I guess, the flat part of the flare. It looks kind of big, but when we round this edge over, it'll kind of shrink down a little bit. You can see the angle we have at the back. I didn't want to make it too sharp or just jump back to the car, because then on the back side you end up with a bunch of, you know, low pressure zone and turbulence and everything. So we're actually going to kind of keep it out, you know, we'll round over this corner so it's not quite so sharp. But what I'm trying to decide now is, do I want to kind of take it like up to the car, or almost leave it just go to the car, you know? So we're gonna hop to the whiteboard. Here's my thought process on it. Let's wipe off all this stuff. All right, so where we're at now, the quarter panel kind of comes down. I have the pink foam kind of sticking out, and like here's the tire. You know, we're gonna round over this corner. I don't know if I want to, do I want to add foam to make something go like this, or just kind of almost leave it cut straight back to the car, because all of this is just frontal area that the car has to push through that just makes extra drag. So, you know, I'm leaning towards, or I might just do like a very shallow one or something like that. So that's my thought process on how to blend it up, you know, on the top here. The front, I definitely want to kind of take out, because if you just ran this straight, you get a huge high pressure zone right here, and you get a bunch of like outwash and turbulence coming off the side. If you can kind of smooth it a little bit, that has an aerodynamic benefit for sure. The other thing, we're not going below this body line right here. The flat floor sits here and the exhaust comes in. I kind of got to get the floor and the exhaust on. I'll just make a whole nother piece that just kind of goes down here at some point. Same thing with behind the tire. Don't really know what I'm doing in this area, so, you know, don't know if I'm going to keep it cut out, or do I want to bring it down and kind of have some streaks or something. We'll figure that one out. And then as far as the side goes, again, I kind of don't want any negative angles on this, because you end up with a lift and drag on this backside. So I'm gonna kind of take it very shallow and kind of, you know, out to meet up with this eventually, and kind of cut it flush with the rear. So we're getting there. Those are kind of my thoughts at the moment. Yeah, it's kind of one of those, like, I'll just kind of make it up as I go type deals. Let's see. Alright, so I got pretty much all the pieces in that I needed. I already started taping it with the packaging tape. A lot of times you'll see people like fill all this in, either expandable foam or more of this pink foam, and then you spend hours and hours and hours like sanding and shaping. I pretty much have, you know, the ribs of the shape that I want. So what we're going to do is kind of use this packaging tape just to kind of fill it up and kind of lay on our first layer or two of carbon. It will be a little bit wavy, but then we can kind of just smooth that out and then do like our final layer or two of carbon, and we'll end up with our finished shape. What's nice about the packaging tape is like you don't need any release or anything. You just lay epoxy right on it and it'll just pop right off. So once the flare comes off, we can just get rid of all this old foam. So that's where we're at right now. We're gonna kind of tape this up, get it kind of exactly, or at least as close to as we want, and then lay on our carbon. So we are set up, all taped, ready to go. I'm gonna be using pretty much just scrap pieces. I make enough carbon fiber bits where I just kind of have a ton of just whatever, little pieces left over. So we're just gonna wet this out and kind of start laying on our carbon. Alright, so here we are with the initial layer done. Under time lapse you can see I got obviously at least one. I tried doing at least 2 layers of carbon over any one spot. You can see how it's a little bit, we'll call it like blocky. It's definitely just like uneven, you know, so that's okay. We'll take care of that in the very next step. But it's really like not too bad if you look down it. So what we're going to do is actually use some long strand fiberglass filler just to kind of smooth any low spots. Then we'll do our final overlay to make it kind of nice enough for this car, but we're not going to win any shows with it. You can see it all set up, it's all hard. So what I need to do now is I picked up some of this stuff. this Bondo hair, the long strand reinforced fiberglass filler. So what I'm going to do is get some 80 grit paper, sand this down, just kind of like rough it up so there's a little bit of a, you know, tooth there for that to bite onto. Pretty much to just lay it in any of like the wavy bits. You know, you can see the light coming across it. Just to kind of make it smoother. You know, I did bodywork for like 10 years. I could spend the time to make this like super smooth if I wanted to or needed to, but I don't need to. I kind of just need something to cover the tires and look half decent. So that's what I'm gonna do. Alright, so I just did a little bit right here, and you can see the reflection in it as I come around. We're already like getting smoother just because I'm kind of laying it heavy in where I know there's like divots and stuff. So this sets up pretty quick. I'm going to cut myself a larger piece of cardboard so I can kind of do the rest of it and do the other side in one shot. But once it sets up, we'll kind of cheese grade like a lot of it, then use some 40 grit to really knock it down quick, and then 40 grit will be fine because you'll see the next step after that. Alright, so by the time I sanded the rest of this and the other side, this is already set up. You know, it's getting hard, but you know, not solid. So that's where this cheese grater comes in. I don't want to turn this into so much of like a bodywork video. You can, you know, you're watching this on YouTube, you can YouTube how to do like bodywork and get as carried away getting this as smooth as you want. But these things are cool because right now it's almost like it's not fully cured, but it's firmed up. Make sure I'm going the right direction doing this one-handed, but you can see how you can kind of take off, you know, a good bit of material without really making much dust. You just make like chunks. So the cheese grater's hitting here, here, and here, so you know we're still low here and here. But we can cheese grate it down more, as well as when we sand it down, kind of get everything to, you know, one level where it's relatively smooth. All right, so our fiberglass work is about roughed out pretty good. Anywhere where it's dark, it's still a little bit low, but not low enough to need more fiberglass or, you know, the long strand Bondo hair we were using. So now we're gonna just switch to just regular old body filler, smooth in some of these like low spots, and, you know, once it's kind of smoothish, do the next step. Starting just regular body work. You know, again, not trying to turn this into like a body work video. So I kind of do like, this stuff sets up in a couple of minutes. It's kind of warm in here. So I'll do like a section while that's setting up, do like another section, then go back and, you know, just kind of keep it all moving along. I'll pick this up when I kind of get done doing the body work and just kind of keep rolling with it. Alright guys, so you can see bodywork's done, and we ended up just putting a coat of black spray paint on it. That'll make sense in a little bit. You can see it's not really perfect, and if you get close you can kind of see some of the sanding marks. We only finished it with 40 grit, but that's fine because right now we're going to set up to kind of just do our overlay. We're going to do one sheet of carbon over this whole thing to give it one nice finished look, but we're going to use a little bit of this bleeder or a breather cloth right here, kind of drape it over it and make our template that we need to cut out. Alright guys, so you can see we got this first coat on. It actually looks pretty good. So we're going to let that cure. Earlier I mentioned how we spray painted it black. So I have this spare piece of carbon right here, and if you hold it up to a light, see how you can see that light behind it? So, you know, the way carbon fiber is just woven, you can kind of see through where the weaves don't cross over each other, if that makes sense. So if we just left everything under here like that Bodywork almost pink color, you'd probably see little, you know, little pink spots everywhere. So that's kind of why we paint it black, then lay this up on. And again, this type of overlay technique is kind of only good for this like custom, like one-off, you know, you can't find what you need, you know, in the aftermarket anywhere. So yeah, so we're gonna let this cure. After it cures is the fun bit where we get to pop all of this off. All right, so moving on from this, you might be wondering if we're doing anything to the front, and we are. You can see the front is much easier. I just did a few pieces of foam, hot glued on, was able to sand it to the exact like net shape that I'm going for, kind of just simple extension. You can see it's already taped up, and it's flat enough where we don't need to get into doing any body work like we did on that one. So this one, what I'm going to do is just overlay probably about 3 or 4 layers of carbon. If it ends up being a little bit flimsy when it's off, I could always just lay up parts on the back side of it, or I'm sorry, lay up carbon on the back side of it to stiffen it up. But that's kind of it on the front. The front, just lay up carbon and pop it off, and there's our flare. Alright guys, so it is the next day. You can see these are dry. So now the exciting bit, we finally get to pop these off and kind of see what we end up with. So first thing I'm going to do is drill probably about 3, I guess I'll call them like alignment holes or something. So that way when I pop these off, I can just, you know, put little pins in there to get this perfectly exactly where it is now. Alright, there you go. There's our rough piece. You can see with the packaging tape, it just popped right off with no special like release or anything. So there you go, front one's good. Let's hop to the back one. There we go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to trim it. Fortunately, like where the foam was, it's really faint, but I can see a line exactly where I need to cut. You know, take some measurements, trim it, and then yeah, kind of finish them. Alright, so after the rough trim, you can see I just put rivets in those alignment holes that we made before we took everything off. So that makes it nice and easy to get it exactly where it goes. You can kind of see how the wheel well looks pretty even, and then right there, I just missed my cut a little bit. So I just took a tape measure and gonna kind of trim this out. I want to get the edges right before I kind of finish it, so I don't have to trim it afterwards. Alright guys, so you can see that the part is sanded. I went pretty aggressive with it. That's 80 grit, and we have some epoxy mixed up. You can use a regular epoxy, but this tabletop epoxy that I get from US Composites, it's much thicker than regular epoxy. It's made to kind of coat surfaces. Plus, I gotta double check. I think there's like UV stabilization in it, which is nice because I can kind of just, you know, brush it on, smooth it out, and it's good enough for this project. So yeah, we're gonna do a small little tiny bit. But once this epoxy's mixed up, I got like a couple minutes, so I'll put the camera down and time lapse through it. So we're gonna use a foam brush, and you can see how you can't really see the weave of the carbon. And then as soon as you go, right, you know, so once we kind of do this whole thing, you can kind of see how it'll bring that weave back up, and it'll get rid of the texture. The fender flare has it like real bad. It'll get rid of that like texture left over from the overlay of the foam. All right guys, so we got them coated. The oven's already going, it's already hot because we're doing a Corvette splitter right here. But you can see, if you get the light behind it, you can see it's not perfect. There's going to be like little bits of like dust and everything because this isn't really like a paint booth. But this is probably the biggest divergence you could have if you're doing something like this on your own, is the final finish you want on yours. Don't be surprised if, you know, sanding it and coating it, you need to do 2, 3, 4 you know, cycles of that to get that nice finish. Again, probably sound like a broken record at this point, but my car being what it is, a race car, and the next race is next weekend. I still got to do fuel cell, a whole bunch of like you know, stuff for this swap. How it kind of comes out of the oven, I'm just going to install them and run it. Should be, for me, it'll be good enough. So yeah, once they cure, we can kind of take them up and mount them. What we're going to do, if you remember, before I took them off, I drilled some holes on this, so that way it's easy to just line back up. We're going to use some rivets as placeholders, kind of mark the flange and trim off this little bit. And then I think what we're going to do is, being a race car, I can't really see any reason I would need to like take the flare on and off easily. So I think for simplicity, I'm just gonna rivet them on, you know. If I ever need to take them off, gotta drill out a few rivets, no big deal. So yeah, let's mark that out and get it cut and mounted. Alright, now all I need to do is drill my holes and rivet it. Alright guys, so the rear is on. It was done just like the front, where the 3 holes that I drilled in it before I took the original off, you know, just kind of put some rivets in as placeholders, did them, and then you can just really quickly go along, rivet it. So I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. You can see that the clear coat isn't perfect, but again, plenty good enough for this project. So yeah, I mean, I think that's about it. Like, as you saw, nothing more than some like foam, sandpaper, packaging tape, and then lay up your part. You can make literally like any size, shape, flare you need for whatever special project you have going on. So I think that's where we're going to wrap this one up. I hope you guys learned something. It was a fun little project. I'm going to keep rolling on the S550 subframe swap if you're following this channel for that. If you're in it for the composites, I'll have more composite videos coming out too. So as always guys, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you in the next one.